All right, welcome to Let's Talk. Today we're going to discuss we're entitling this discussion The Demise of the BTG by Design. So BTG meaning the Back to Godhead magazine. So there's a lot of interesting histories to the BTG, Back to Godhead magazine. And so we want to go through some of those histories and explain, why we're calling this the demise of the BTG. Obviously, the Back to Godhead magazine is still in circulation. It's out there, although I don't think I've seen one in about 8 to 10 years, but that may be just my fault because I'm not a subscriber. However, there's an interesting story to the Back to Godhead magazine, and it kind of culminates in the demise. And I got a sheet here, Gary, you have one also with some of the dates. A critical demise somewhere around 1982, 83. As we go through the discussion and you read the various things, we'll get to the exact date. All right, so the Back to Godhead magazine, as we all know, was started by Srila Prabhupada when he was still in his householder life and living in Calcutta at Sitakanta Banerjee Lane, number 6 and 7. Actually, his house was number 6, and he also had the attached house, which he also leased. It was number 7. And Srila Prabhupada lived in a 2-story, or it might even have been ground plus 2, but it was at least ground floor plus 1. And the number 7 was a single story, just ground floor, and they were connected by a door on the inside, and he subleased that for some insignificant amount of something like a half a rupee or a rupee, whatever it was, to Srila Sridhara Maharaj, who then established his preaching in Calcutta from number 7, Sitakanta Banerjee Lane. And so both Prabhupada shared his house with Sridhara Maharaj for a number of years, at least 5. It may have even been more. So anyway, it was during this time that Srila Prabhupada established the Back to Godhead magazine. And I might add here, because as we get into the story, I'll forget to mention it, that when Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj was just a 16-year-old runaway, actually. He ran away from his village to join Sridhar Maharaj. Sridhar Maharaj decided to hide him in Prabhupada's house in Calcutta. And so when he was living there with Prabhupada, and also sometimes some other brahmacharis were there, Govinda Maharaj used to tell me the story how he was the first distributor of the Back to Godhead magazine other than Srila Prabhupada himself. And Prabhupada would send him out to distribute, and he would give him some rather critical arguments to give to the Kali worshippers.
Right.
And Govinda Maharaj would march out there and go a few blocks away to this park, this little park, and distribute his Back to Godhead magazines, Prabhupada's magazine, and he would encounter, various types of non-devotees, people who were vehemently against the followers of Mahaprabhu, Smarta Brahmins, worshippers of Kali. And he said that several times while presenting Prabhupada's strong arguments, the crowd that he was preaching to became so infuriated that they tried to beat him, and he had to really run for his life and run back to Sitakanta Banerjee Lane and jump inside and lock the door. And several times they chased him, I guess, right up to the door of Prabhupada's house. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there before we get going on this, because we're going to go in a different direction here.
Right.
And so I just wanted to mention that. Govinda Maharaj, who later became Sridhar Maharaj's successor, was one, if not the first distributor of Back to Godhead magazine. So in those days, how many they would distribute, who knows? Prabhupada does mention he distributed them even at a loss of printing costs. All right, so there couldn't have been that many every day. All right, so we have The beginning of the Back to Godhead magazine in 1954 here on our sheet.
44.
Sorry, 54.
Yeah.
Early in the morning. 1944. I've heard references, devotees say 1943, and there's even a recording you're going to read here where Prabhupada says, Back to Godhead is my life and soul. He says that he started the magazine in 1947, but this is actually just a misnomer on his part. While speaking, he didn't give the exact date. But as far as we can see from, I think, written, published evidence, it was in 1944. So it started in 1944, and also you'll find in Satsarup Das Goswami's biography of Srila Prabhupada, you'll find there some recollections or descriptions how Prabhupada, when he was living in Delhi in later years as a sannyasi, and that would be after 1959, he used to go to the tea shops around Chandi Chowk. Chandi Chowk is a very old area of Delhi, old Delhi, and he would go to the chai shops around Chandi Chowk and distribute, sit in the chai shops and talk with the guys in there sipping teas and distribute his magazine and so forth. So from those days when Prabhupada, let's imagine maybe how many could he distribute in a day? 10, 20, 30? I doubt 30. More like probably less than 10. And how many days consecutively he would be able to go out and do that. There was other services he had, and given all the necessities and issues that might arise, how many could he distribute in a year? And I would speculate, even with his mail-outs, he would do his mail-outs, and that would also drive down his cost because he would mail that magazine out to people. We should have got that cover letter, Gary, because it states in there that Back to Godhead magazine is to save the human being from becoming an animal again in the next life. It's a really, maybe we can find that after this recording and just post a link or a picture of that.
Sure.
It was a flyer that he sent out. Well, okay, to jump ahead to 1978, reached the peak. From what we were able to research and find out, that reached the peak of Back to Godhead magazine for the year 1978. A whopping 4.6 million copies of Back to Godhead magazine were distributed, and that's not counting anything that was being published in India as like the Hindi Back to Godhead, or there was a Gujarati edition. It wasn't monthly or bi-monthly, but every once in a while there was a Gujarati edition or there was a Hindi edition. So this 4.6 million copies sold in the year 1978 does not include anything Gujarati or Hindi or anything like that. So let me put up a picture of what we think is the first Back to Godhead magazine. Now, is there a date here?
I believe there is. It's 1944, I believe.
There it is, yes. The first appearance on the Vyasa Puja Day, 1944. Now, it isn't important. This isn't the point. Like, we're saying this is the first one. There might have been another one earlier, but whatever. This is what the Back to Godhead magazine looked like in its formative years, in its first years. Later, around 1953, I believe, Srila Prabhupada published a tabloid type of Back to Godhead magazine, like it was a big newspaper. I think you call that a tabloid, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And it was in color. It was in red, white, and blue. That's what I remember. It had red, it had blue, black ink, blue
I
ink.
think you'll find that in I think the BBT, they printed a hardbound book, a big bound book of the old Back to Godheads, and that's in there. The color one is actually in there. Yeah.
Yes, it's in one of those, I believe it's in one of those color ones, because I used to have some copies of that, actual real copies that we found in India. And it's in one of those articles where Srila Prabhupada speaks about Radharani as the supreme personality of Godheadus.
Yeah. Prabhupadism. Yeah.
So there's a lot of nectar in those early Back to Godhead magazines, and by nectar I mean the information is sublime, but the preaching method is really forceful. It's
very
really
topical as well.
Excuse me.
Very topical also. He
Very
was talking
topical.
about
It's in one of those early
things happening
magazines.
at the time.
What's that?
He was talking about things that were happening in India at the time, political things and so on, giving a spiritual sort of commentary to it.
Yes. And it's in one of those early issues that he also told the story of liquid beauty.
Yes.
Which was very interesting. So that was the Back to Godhead magazine in 1944. Now we have, of course, Srila Prabhupada comes to the United States in 1965. And here's a picture of the first, I might say, quotations, psychedelic-looking Back to Godhead magazine from the 1966. So this being published in the United States and layout and design being done by Srila Prabhupada's earliest disciples, I think. What was that devotee's name? Rai Ram became a leading disciple in the production of the Back to Godhead magazine. So as soon as I saw this cover, I said, yep, that's it, mid-60s, the psychedelic era, with all the circles going around Radha and Krishna. So, all right. So in time, and Prabhupada was very pleased with that, Back to Godhead magazine became a full-color magazine. Beautiful color covers, always some nice pictures of Krishna usually on the cover, and filled with very exciting art. It's not exciting, but very enthusing articles by His Divine Grace and by various devotees talking about the Sankirtan movement, the philosophy, the Ratha Yatras, the Janmastamis, and all these very inspiring events. All right, so Gary, would you please read that first quote here? I believe we have the same sheet. It's called Back to Godhead is My Life and Soul.
Yeah.
And, please read that.
So this is a letter to Guru Das from 1970. And Srila Prabhupada writes, Back to Godhead is my life and soul. Please, therefore, try to distribute BTG as many as it is possible. I started this magazine in 1947 in my householder life. I was spending 300 or 400 rupees at the time, and I was distributing this magazine without any consideration how much I was getting in return. Practically the whole money was spent without any return. But 10 years after, from 1954 to 1959, the struggle was very hard because at that time I had no money, and alone I was editing, publishing and securing money for publication. So it was a great struggle. My ambition was that I would publish BTG in huge quantity so that people may understand transcendental blessings of Lord Chaitanya. Now, since I have come to your country, I have entrusted the matter to my beloved American boys and girls, and I wish to see that this magazine is published and distributed in the American way, like Reader's Digest, Life, etc., published in millions and distributed all over the world. Actually, the position of BTG should be more important than any Monday magazine, because it contains the quintessence of human necessities.
All right, well, so Srila Prabhupada says in the beginning that Back to Godhead is his Back to Godhead magazine. It is his life and soul, and tells us something of its origin and the struggles he went through. And then coming to the United States, he has relinquished this publication to the hands of his American disciples, boys and girls. And of course, you can extend that as time went on, that meant the European devotees, from people from England, Germany, everybody could have a part in distributing and producing this Back to Godhead magazine. However, because it was primarily an English magazine, then it did have a more limited distribution, say in Russia or in Poland or in Germany or in France. And I think over time, I don't know exactly, the devotees did did present some other magazines, Back to Godheads, in those languages. I'm not quite
Yeah,
sure.
I think they did.
He's primarily speaking about the English magazine. So he he has cited two things, and he must have seen these magazines. One is called Reader's Digest. The other was called Life, or Life magazine. So I have a picture here. Let me just pop this up on the screen for a minute. This is Reader's Digest from back in the mid-'60s. Here's a copy from January 1967. So that Srila Prabhupada's writing this letter to Guru Das 1973 years later. So this is the Reader's Digest magazine, and it had a very a peculiar type of a layout where you got the basically you got the table of contents on the cover.
Yeah.
Maybe not in every issue, but I always remembered seeing it like that. Mm-hmm. And you would find this Reader's Digest almost speaking in every home in America. And where would he have seen that? In Butler, Pennsylvania, in Mr. and Mrs. Agarwal's house. He would have seen these two magazines almost for certain. I mean, I grew up seeing these magazines in the 50s in my grandma's house and in my mother's house. These were the two most widely distributed magazines in the world at the time.
Right.
And the other one, let me see, I got a picture of it, Life magazine here. I had a little picture of Life magazine from, what's that, 1965. 35 cents. 35 cents. That Reader's Digest was quite thick. It was always a quarter-inch plus thick. It was more like a book. It was the size of a average format book today, let's say something like this Nectar of Devotion. It wasn't hard copy, but it was about the same size. So, but this Life magazine was mondo. It was like mega format. It was at least 12 inches wide and more than 13, like 15 inches tall. But it would only be about, 64 pages, 70 pages. It wasn't, but maybe a third as thick as, or half maximum as thick as the Reader's Digest. But these two magazines were everywhere, practically speaking, in every home. So his desire was to see the Back to Godhead magazine reach a world circulation and surpass Reader's Digest and Life magazine. So at a time that almost that got really close. So read this other, you have some other quotes there. Letter to Rai Ram, 1967 also.
Yes. Prabhupada says, this Back to Godhead will always remain the backbone of the society, because the more the magazine is popular, the more our society becomes popular.
Okay, that's a letter to Rai Ram.
Yeah,
1967. So the Back to Godhead magazine will always remain the backbone of the society. So he's speaking about the International Society for Krishna Consciousness.
Yeah.
All right, another letter to Rai Ram. Please
give your primary attention for improving Back to Godhead, the backbone of our movement. That's again to Rai Ram, August 67.
Okay. So he's in different times he's referred to this in his letters as the backbone, and later on he describes it as his life and soul. So then you have yet another quote there about
he says again to Rai Ram, March 1968, you should take Back to Godhead as your life and soul. Your work for Back to Godhead is first and foremost above all. If you do not find any time for other things, there is no objection. But I want to see that you make Back to Godhead a successful magazine like Life magazine or Illustrated Weekly of India. I'm very much ambitious of the progress of the paper, and you can use your discretion how to do it. You are at liberty to do it with full power of attorney. So far, discussions of political affairs in Back to Godhead, it is not a very good suggestion. But if you can present political affairs in spiritual light, as I wrote some articles in the original Back to Godhead, in the matter of political divisions of India and catastrophes thereof. That requires a very thorough understanding of the whole situation. If you can do this, it will be a great service. I wanted, therefore, a combined editorial board. Unfortunately, you have to do everything yourself. For this work, I think you will have to invite cooperation from others who may help you. Anyway, Back to Godhead must be improved to the fullest extent because it is the backbone of our society.
So he repeats over and over, stressing the importance of the Back to Godhead magazine. All right?
Yeah.
There's another letter here to Rai Ram. Rai Ram, such a fortunate soul
Yeah.
who have received so many good instructions directly from Srila Prabhupada.
Shall I read that?
Yeah.
You are a very sincere boy, trying your best to serve Krishna, and by his grace, you are quite fit for this business. And considering all these points, I have entrusted Back to Godhead in your hand, because this paper is the beginning of my spiritual life. During the time of my Guru Maharaj's passing away, his last instruction to me was, you try to preach whatever you have learned from me in English, and that will do good to you and the people who will hear you. This instruction was given to me in 1936, and I started the paper in 1944. And as I have told you several times, that I am awaiting for the day when this paper will take the shape of Life magazine or similar other magazines in the matter of its popularity.
All right. So, we're establishing these points here. I think we can move ahead. Go ahead. Now there's a letter to Brahmananda.
Yes, this is 1968, September. Let him, speaking about Rairam, be seriously engaged in improving the shape and quality of Back to Godhead. And I am sure in future we'll have as good a position as the other mundane magazines like Life, Time, etc. It is very good.
Continue.
A letter to Madhusudan, 20th of November 68. To make this magazine a great success is very, very important to the mission. Then another letter to Madhuvisa, April 1970. When Back to Godhead will be published, not in hundreds of thousands, but in millions, that will give me great solace. And then a letter to Hamsadutta, 1973, February. Srila Prabhupada writes, I cannot stress this point enough, that we must handle this publication of Back to Godhead very nicely. It is one of the most important aspects of our society. So you please do the needful in this regard, and please contact me soon.
So we're giving all these quotes so that there can be no mistake about it. The Back to Godhead magazine was to be something very, very, very substantial in the Krishna consciousness movement. It is referred to time and time again as the backbone of the Krishna consciousness movement, of the society that Srila Prabhupada established when he came to America. It is described as his life and soul, and he has said, you must take this up as your life and soul. And here in this last thing, in this letter to Madhuvisa in 1970, he says, when the Back to Godhead magazine, not in hundreds or thousands of copies, but when it is being distributed in millions of copies, this will give him great solace. So by 1978, which is the year after the disappearance of Srila Prabhupada, Back to Godhead magazine distribution reached its pinnacle. 4.6 million copies in the year 1978. And gradually, the numbers were less. We don't have it wasn't like it just suddenly became 4 million. No, it was a build up, and, very close to 4 million, or maybe it was 4 million, 0.2 or something in 77 and 76 and 75. Really, the book distribution and Back to Godhead magazine book distribution in big numbers started basically in 1972. I mean, I can remember being in the Salt Lake City Temple, and there was we just had a little preaching center, but every center was required to take so many Back to Godhead magazines per month, depending on how many devotees you had. So we had 4 or 5 devotees maximum. And there were just piles of these magazines. And it was like, but that we were handling every month. We were managing 8 hours of Harinam every day in the street and door to door on certain times of the year. And we were managing that. But the books, there were piles and piles piles of Nectar Devotions, boxes and boxes, and the big Krishna book trilogy and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. We were like scratching our head like, there's only 4 of us here. What do we need all these books for? And finally, it caught on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole interesting story that maybe we can speak about sometime, that how that caught on. And just to mention, there were 3 centers that launched book distribution into the world as it became known in the later 70s. And that was the LA Temple, the San Francisco Temple, and the Denver Temple. Mm. These 3 temples and their Sankirtan parties led the way. And in the summer of '82, we even made what was called an invasion of the East Coast. And I was a Sankirtan leader for Denver, and we were planning to go to the East Coast because several of us were from the East Coast, and we knew the size of the cities back east were so much. In Denver, you're out in the middle of nowhere, and we'd pretty much saturated Denver, and we would go over to Salt Lake City. And again, that's in the middle of nowhere place, small town compared to Boston, Chicago, Philadelphia, New York City, all these places. And there we were fixing up our van for this journey to the East Coast, and Yogesh Chandra came through with Bhuti Manta and some other devotees, and they stopped off at the Sunday feast to announce that they were headed to the East Coast, and all of a sudden everybody realized, competition, and they took off before the feast and just started, to get there first, and then we hustled up our job and our work on our van, and I can't remember all the Pranabalava, Mahashakti, Dattatreya, a group. We took off right behind them 2 days later and chased them to Chicago, and it was a really, but those are the 3 temples that started at L.A., San Francisco, and the Denver Temple. And then it was like, it caught on like wildfire. And it just went, and great personalities arose, and it went on, and it just became phenomenal. And again, this figure, 4.6 million back to Godheads. Well, today, the 0.6 million is not even there. I would be surprised if even 30 or 40,000 are distributed around the world monthly. In fact, it's no longer even a monthly magazine. It's a bi-monthly magazine. So there's a history here about the decline. And I'm going to tell some of that. I'm going to just verbalize and tell some of that history. Now, there's some other things here before we get into that, how Back to Godhead magazine used to include articles by Srila Prabhupada's godbrothers from time to time. Mm-hmm. There were at least 1 or more articles by Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor, who was a disciple of Bhakti Siddhanta, godbrother of Prabhupada. His initiated name was Adi Keshavadas, but he went by Dr. O.B.L. Kapoor. And in the earliest days of Back to Godhead magazine, when it first began, there was at least 1 article that we can find that was written by Srila Sridhara Maharaj, also godbrother of Srila Prabhupada. That article was called The Highest Attainment and Present Adjustment. All right, so that's just an interesting fact, because there were people who were godbrothers of Srila Prabhupada who were not in ISKCON, but their contributions to Back to Godhead magazine from its very beginning and at different times during its growth was welcomed by Srila Prabhupada. Now, I think you have one quote here. There's a quote. There's 2 quotes, actually. There's a letter to Dr. Kapoor. Yeah, why don't you read that, and then read that also one letter to Satsvarup Das Goswami. Quotes.
So this was a letter to Dr. Kapoor, July the 1st, 1973. So I understand that you have written another article, the Absolute as both qualified and unqualified, and transmitted it to the editor. This is very good. This writing is first-class preaching, and we want to publish more and more of your articles in Back to Godhead. Then there's a letter to Satsvarup Das Goswami, 2nd of November 73. Regarding Back to Godhead being the most important magazine in the world, therefore I am seeking to see Dr. Kapoor's article for getting attention.
All right, so we bring this up because this is part of what we call the decline of Back to Godhead magazine. When the spirit, the broader spirit of preaching Krishna consciousness and that which is to be shared as a shared responsibility of the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta, Srila Prabhupada was almost, you could say, foremost in trying to engage his godbrothers in the greater mission, the world mission of Krishna consciousness. Most of them were preaching in India, Assam, and outlying areas, sometimes even Pakistan or something like that. But Srila Prabhupada was encouraging their participation in a worldwide preaching endeavor. So the reason we bring this up is because in the what year was that? It was somewhere in the mid-1980s. No, late 1980s, like 1988 or 89. Myself and other group of devotees had gathered together on the outside of ISKCON, and we'd established the Gaudiya Vaiṣṇava Society. Actually, it was established by Sripad Tripurari Maharaj. He's the one who formally established it. And then later, Kanangiri Maharaj, Sadhu Maharaj, Vishnu Maharaj, myself, we all joined together. And we were preaching independently of ISKCON. In other words, we were out of ISKCON. And we were preaching independently. And there's a whole history that goes on there. We started our own magazine called The Clarion Call. Later, we had a magazine called the Gaudiya Darshan.
Gaudiya Vedanta, I think it was,
Gaudiya Vedanta, right. And so at that particular time, there was some dialogue between, now I forget everybody's name. Gary, you can help me remember. There was the Mataji who was like the working editor for
Pranada.
What was her name?
Pranada.
Right, Pranada Mataji. She was like the more hands-on working editor, and along with her staff of consultants was a devotee named Naveen Krishna. I think he was an Indian body devotee who had been living in the United States for many, many years. And the official editors were Satsvarup Das Goswami and Hridayananda Maharaj, but this Pranada and these other devotees, they were the hands-on working editorial staff. And so we began to have some dialogue with them through Palace Press, which was a commercial operation run by a devotee from Marin County, San Francisco area named Ramdas. And Palace Press was doing work for those little black Bhagavatams that Hansaduta had printed. They were done by Palace Press. Or anyway, there's some dialogue going on between us and them, and we had actually and so anyway, it culminated in Tripurari Maharaj. He wrote an article for Back to Godhead magazine, and he sent it down to the Back to Godhead offices in L.A. They were in L.A. at the time, and he received back a letter on Back to Godhead letterhead, and I'm sure he still has that in his file somewhere. And this letter said, thank you very much for your article. It was an excellent article in Krishna consciousness. And this is the part I specifically remember. It said, but unfortunately, we will not be able to publish your article because you are not in ISKCON. And we cannot publish articles by devotees who are not in ISKCON. So this is certainly very disappointing. Because here we have a reference that Prabhupada is encouraging his godbrother. So Tripurari Maharaj is certainly a godbrother. He was even called the incarnation of book distribution at one time. But it was turned down. So here we see there's a departure from the spirit of Back to Godhead magazine. And there were other things that followed. So one of the things that followed was there was this, I think it's called the ABA, the American Book Publishers Association or something like that. It's a huge, what do you call those things when all the...
Federation?
No, it's a, what do they call them, where everybody comes to sell their product? It's a convention. It's a book publishers convention. And it must have been 87. It must have been 87. 87 or 88. That convention was held in Los Angeles. And Pranada, who was going to be there with a BBT booth, and she also worked for Ram Dass, and Palace Press was going to be there with a booth, and so she asked Ram Dass to invite Tripurari Maharaj and myself. I think Vishnu Maharaj was part of that meeting also, if we would come out to Las Vegas and meet with them to discuss the future publication of the Back to Godhead. Now, I have to go back in history to 1982. And this is where kind of you'd have to say Back to Godhead magazine fell off the shelf. And it went from hundreds of thousands and even still millions of copies being distributed a year, and that means hundreds of thousands every month, to zero. It went down to practically zero. And here is what happened. There were many devotees. It used to be that when Back to Godhead magazine arrived, whoa, when that truck pulled up from the BBT, everything stopped except the artik that was going on, or the offering. I mean, everything stopped. Everybody just piled into the Sankirtan office. The cases of books were ripped open, and everybody got a Back to Godhead magazine in the temple and just started reading through that magazine like people starved from water on the desert or something. I mean, it was the inspirational, and it came every month. And you'd have to like prod the devotees to put it down to get back into their service. So, but by 1982, there was a growing dissatisfaction with the content of the Back to Godhead magazine. It was, spoken of as becoming dry, not pertaining, just not being that substantial a magazine anymore. And so what happened was there were two magazines that were developed out of Los Angeles that admittedly were much better for distribution on the street. And I might add, remember, Back to Godhead magazine is only being distributed on the street or door to door. It's a Sankirtan magazine. Well, two other magazines were developed. Now, we couldn't find pictures of all of them, but we did find pictures of this one. This one is called Origins. And this dealt with more like scientific approach and scientific articles related to Krishna consciousness, etc., like that, the Vedic science, wisdom, and all these types of things. And this was an excellent a magazine. Here you can see from this cover, the Big Bang, Mysteries of Consciousness. This is really cutting edge articles and preaching. But it wasn't like a magazine that would come out every month or whatever like that. It was like just here it is. And Origins. And the plan, I think, was every couple of months, 6 months to upgrade it and like that. So the other one was called Who Are They? And we couldn't find a copy of that to show, but it had a picture of a devotee, a mata, and another a man and a woman devotee on the cover. And I believe the woman devotee, the Mataji on the cover, was a famous model from Europe, somewhere in Europe. I can't remember exactly, but she was a well-known personality in the modeling world, and she was a devotee. So her picture was on the cover with somebody else who was quite well known. And these were great magazines. So what happened was, from L.A., where these books were produced by the BBT and by the L.A. devotees, the GBC would request each temple to take so many of these magazines. Well, what was going on was the temples would respond and go, yeah, we'd love to, but we have to fulfill our Back to Godhead quota, and we're struggling to do that. So we'll only take 50 of your magazines or 100 of your magazines because we're bound by this thousands and thousands of magazines. I remember I was in Chicago during part of this period of time, and we had Back to Godhead magazines stacked to the ceiling, and we were struggling to distribute them. And why were we just struggling to distribute them? Well, the simple answer is by 1982, thousands of Prabhupada's disciples had left the movement, and many of them didn't leave on their own accord. They were basically pushed out or given such a situation that they had no alternative but to leave on their own accord. So pushed out or leaving on their own accord. In any event, thousands, I'm talking thousands of devotees. And so there just there wasn't the devotee manpower that there'd been previously. And these magazines were stacking up, so it wasn't going to be possible to take, a couple thousand origins and a couple thousand who are theys and distribute them because each temple had a quota and they had to fulfill. So then the GBC in Las Vegas and a few others, I don't know who they were. I do know who they were. There was Rameshwara Swami and Jayadeva.
Oh, Los Angeles.
Yeah, sorry, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
They hatched an idea based on some of these statements that Prabhupada had made about these other magazines. Well, these other magazines, Life magazine, particularly Reader's Digest, although it could be found on the newsstand, this was primarily a subscription magazine. So they connected with a gentleman named Mr. Podar.
Yeah.
And Mr. Podar was an Indian gentleman who had made a fortune in mail order business in the United States. Now, I don't know all the details building up to it, and I was in Chicago when this happened. And there was a North American, I think they called it a North American GBC meeting. I believe it was the summer of 82. It could have been as late as 83. I don't remember. But there was a meeting in Detroit, and Mr. Podar was the guest speaker at the meeting in front of the main North American GBCs, and some other senior devotees were there. And at the end of this presentation, it was decided, and Mr. Podar, I just heard the summary of this at the time. Mr. Podar said, if you want the Back to Godhead magazine to become as successful as Life, Reader's Digest, Time, Weekly, all these other magazines that Prabhupada, your Guru Maharaj, has mentioned, then you have to take it off the street. You can't be distributing this magazine on the street, on the footpath you see in the parking lots. You have to make it a dignified magazine by making it a subscription-only magazine. And so it was decided at that meeting that Back to Godhead would no longer be a street distributed magazine. It would be by subscription only. So I think at that time
Back to 1982.
Huh?
That was 82.
That was in 82, the summer of 82.
Because in January 83, they made an announcement in the Back to Godhead magazine that it would no longer be found on the streets. It'll be the subscription only. In January 83, that was.
Yeah, and so the distribution of Back to Godhead magazine plummeted from millions down to almost zero. And I remember that, well, there were two things. First off, why do you subscribe to any magazine? Because you are interested in its content. Well, who's going to be interested in its content? The devotees first. I mean, other people haven't even seen the magazine. And if you can't give them the magazine, how are they going to subscribe to the magazine?
Right.
So that was a hard spot in the rock right there. And I remember we called it the guilt subscriptions. So then around each temple came these newsletters saying, quoting these same quotings. This is the backbone of our movement. This is Prabhupada's life and soul. Every devotee should have a subscription. And then it started like every devotee should give his mother, father, brother, sister, aunt, uncle, grandmas a subscription. We called it the guilt subscriptions, you see. And but what did this do? This opened it up for the temples to start getting dozens and dozens of cases every month of origins and who are they. So that's why this talk is called The Demise of BTG by Design. So the design was to get BTG out of the way, of course, in the thinking that, yeah, if we listen to Mr. Podar, who's just a mundane businessman, we found the inspiration, and now we're going to make Back to Godhead the fulfillment of Prabhupada's dreams. Well, it has become nothing even close to that. I would venture to say there are devotees living in temples, ISKCON temples, in the United States that don't even see the monthly, and it's no longer monthly, it's a bi-monthly. I'll get to that point. They don't even see the magazine anymore. And it is certainly not the magazine that it used to be in terms of content, in enthusing the devotees. But that aside, it's no longer reaching out to millions of people in the world every day, every month, every year. We're 40 years on, almost 50 years on from its heyday. It's a non-entity. You don't see it on the newsstand. You talk to somebody at a college, a university, here, there, and anywhere and everywhere. Nobody ever heard of it. No. Everybody knows about Yoga Journal. Yoga Journal, right?
Yeah.
But who's heard of Back to Godhead magazine? So it has entered a period of catastrophic demise by design. By design. Now I might say, well, I'm not going to get into that, but some of those people who orchestrated that demise by design then stumbled terribly and fell down in Krishna consciousness. I don't know if it's related, but one cannot help but wonder. Because this was the preaching arm more than any other book. And if anything came close to it in importance, it was Bhagavad Gita as it is, as a preaching arm, as a weapon to distribute to the world. But being 1,000 pages thick, that's a lot to put in somebody's hand for a starter, you see.
That's no small statement that Srila Prabhupada mentioned on so many occasions, being the backbone of the society. That's a very strong statement.
He never said it should be a subscription magazine only. I mean, subscriptions are certainly good. So what happened then later on? Moving on, that was in 82. You said 82 was the meeting?
82 was the meeting. 83 was when they announced it in the Back to Godhead magazine.
Right.
Subscription only.
And I remember being in a room with Ganapati Swami, Tripurari Maharaj, and Koki, the temple president in Chicago, when the news came to us from, or maybe it was when the announcement came officially, or that earlier in the summer. And I said, somebody write this down. This is the day they killed the BTG. So anyway, it has never risen to be even a fraction of its a shadow of its former self. And we have to remember, this was started on the streets of Calcutta. It was distributed in the tea shop. This was a preacher's magazine, you see. And Prabhupada wanted to see it everywhere. So maybe a time could have come when it could have been taken off the street and put on the shelf, but it was certainly premature to do that in 1982. Maybe 50 years, let us continue with this magazine as it was for another 50 or 100 years, and maybe it would reach up to that level. But it was way over idealistic to think that this was going to happen. So what happened now let's move forward into the later 1980s, and we had established this Clarion Call magazine. And we used to have the numbers then because we had the inside connections, the inside contacts with the BTG editorial staff, the working staff. And we had our magazine, and we were at close to 5,000 subscriptions. And this magazine, Clarion Call, was simply based on the value of the magazine itself. We didn't have any street distribution capacity. We had a very small group of devotees. So, but we went into the commercial end of how do you get magazines out there? You need to have advertising. If a magazine has no advertising, it doesn't mean anything. Magazines must have advertising. If you just go out the newsstand and pick up anything, there's advertising because the cost of the magazine doesn't pay for anything, actually. You lose money on the cost of the magazine. All money from newspapers and magazines is made by the advertising. So we entered into that world. We had a magazine, a full color magazine called Clarion Call.
You have a picture of that?
Yeah, I got one to put up here. Just have one. This is called Clarion Call magazine. We had very topical subjects. We were on the newsstand. We had close to 5,000 subscribers at a time when BTG had not yet reached 3,000 subscribers. And this was in 87. Clarion Call, I believe, was in 87. What's this? Is there a date on this? No, it was only by volumes. Okay, it was in 87, 88 that we published this magazine for a couple years. And Back to Godhead had been on subscription for about 5 or 6 years, and they hadn't even reached 3,000 yet. And the vast, you could say the 90% of that, or the vast majority of those subscriptions were guilt subscriptions, like temples taking a subscription, devotees taking a subscription, and come to the rescue, Hindus. Giving a subscription to a Hindu for signing up as a life member. It was not the people from the world that Back to Godhead magazine used to be distributed to. It was now the in-house crowd, and they still hadn't reached 3,000. And Clarion Call, within 3-4 months, was knocking on, well, it took longer than 3-4 months. About after the first half a year, we had nearly 5,000 subscribers, as I remember it. So one devotee remembered, was that you walking in a GBC room in 1988 or something in Mayapur and seeing Clarion Call?
No, that wasn't me. No.
Okay. There was another devotee who told me they went into the GBC meeting room in Mayapur to clean up after the big meeting. There was Clarion Call magazines all over the place. Laying around all over the place. And I talked to one of my godbrother GBCs sometime later, and they said that, yes, the discussion was, why can't Back to Godhead magazine be like this Clarion Call? So what happened was, in the course of all this time, Pranada and Naveen Krishna requested a meeting with myself and Tripurari Maharaj, who were the two senior editors of Clarion Call. That if we could come out to this Vegas book fair, that's what it was, a book fair, and meet with them and discuss Back to Godhead magazine and a potential involvement with the production of Back to Godhead magazine. So we went there. We had meetings for 2 afternoons. The meetings lasted about 3 hours on 2 different days, and the meetings were recorded by them. And we just told them our whole journey in this Clarion Call magazine, what we had discovered about, the journalism, the journalistic world, the commercial end of it, what distributors, because they were considering putting Back to Godhead magazine on the newsstand, because Clarion Call, at that time, you'd walk into any health food store, Walden bookstore, anywhere, and go over in the alternative section, and yep, there was Clarion Call. How did you do this? So we were very open and shared all the information, and gave them some suggestions, what they might do, et cetera, et cetera. So at around that same time, not that same day, but shortly after that, Pranada requested, and I had some correspondence with her. I can't remember how that unfolded, whether it was letters. I don't think it was letters. I think it was through Ramdas. She requested, would Tripurari Maharaj and myself, would we agree to become secret editors of the Back to Godhead magazine? And I thought, wow, this sounds like really covert stuff. I'm into it, So I go to Tripurari Maharaj and say, hey, Maharaj, they want us to become covert editors of the Back to Godhead magazine. Just think of the fun this could be, And he goes, no way. That's their problem. They can't recognize the source of anything. And we were very much tied together at that point, working together. So I honored his respect, but I would have liked him to have said, yeah, let's do it, Not from the standpoint of doing some mischief, but from the standpoint of trying to improve that magazine.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened then was that after meeting with us, a short time later, they took the Back to Godhead magazine. It completely vanished. It was not published for 1 year.
That was 1990.
1990.
Yeah.
And when it came out after that, well, let me see if I can see that. That's it. Yeah, I'm going to put this one up on the screen. Darn it, I'm always hitting the wrong button. So let me go back to 1 second. Let me take this one off and let me put this one back on here. You can see that under the Back to Godhead logo there, it says the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement. Now, this had been on since, my gosh, forever? I don't know. Let's see. First issue. Darn it, I'm always hitting the wrong button. No, it doesn't say the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement, but when it comes to the USA, no, it's just the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But at a particular point, now I don't know which year it began, we'd have to look through all the archives, it says the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement. So this was very important, and from as early as I can remember, in 1970, and I'm sure before that, it said the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement. Well, what happened was when the, where in the heck is that? Yeah. After being off the, after being out of print, out of publication for 1 year, the magazine came out and we were shocked to see that it no longer said the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement. They took that off the magazine for I don't know how many months, and at that point, it was no longer a monthly magazine. It was a bi-monthly magazine. And from that, this isn't the first issue, I don't think, or maybe it is. But it didn't have the magazine, that was no longer there, the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement. Mm-hmm. So what we realized is in those two days of 3 hours and 3 hours meetings, and they recorded, and we talked about different angles of vision. How do you want this to be? What kind of magazine? Is this subscription only? Do you want to be on the newsstand? Who is this magazine for? Are you targeting the devotee community? Are you going to target the Hindu community? Because, it's hard to have a magazine that just targets the whole world, but that's also possible. So what do you want to have? Well, when we saw this and we went through the magazine, we realized, my gosh, they just mumbo-jumbled all of our suggestions. They took, like if you wanted a magazine for the newsstand, we had said, we said, maybe you don't want to put the Magazine of the Hare Krishna Movement on the cover because guess what? You guys have got a very unpopular movement except amongst the Hindus. You had the Robin George case in the newspapers at the time. You had
airport
the
scams.
Sublochan murder in the newspapers at the time. You had the New Vrindavan, I don't know what they called that, money laundering or some kind of racketeering. Right. You had all these scams and not like, oh yeah, Hare Krishna movement, so wonderful. The 60s were gone. So he said, maybe you don't want to put that on there. But if it's just going to be for your community and Hindus, and definitely you want to have it on there. So we explained many things about magazines. For example, we explained to them Srila Prabhupada had said the way that first a magazine should have the article of Bhakti Siddhanta, then his article, then followed by other devotee articles. I said, that's fine. That's spiritual. No problem. I said, but Clarion Call, we're not bound to that. And in the commercial world of journalism magazines, the center spread is the most valuable part of any magazine. That's where you're going to find your main article in the center spread. And whatever the main article is, something related to that appears on the cover, you see. Mm-hmm. And I said, but if you're just going to, it's a spiritual magazine, spiritual movement, then certainly follow Prabhupada's suggestions that he had given them about the order of articles. But if you're going to, if you're going to break for that, or we even suggested maybe you should have different types of Back to Godhead magazine, one for the public, one for the devotees. And what we saw was they couldn't discriminate which category our suggestions belonged in, and they shuffled them together. And we were like, oh my God, what have they done?
Well, I think what they'd done is the very first magazine that came out in 91 after that 1-year hiatus, in the editorial, they thank again Mr. Podar for all his advice that we are now following. So they'd obviously gone back to Mr. Podar and listened to him again.
Yeah, so they had a mixture of ideas, suggestions from us, Mr. Podar, and in the process, well, you know what? Forget about us. Just stick with what Srila Prabhupada said. His magazine was about. Right. Clarion Call was not Prabhupada's magazine. That was our magazine. We started that independently. Not that that was a bad thing, but we were kicked out of ISKCON. So what are we supposed to do? Dry up and blow away? No, thank you. So, but for them, forget Podar, forget Clarion Call. Just stick with what Srila Prabhupada wanted. So this Podar, very successful in the material world in a mail order business, but not spiritually inspired, not divinely connected, and they followed his advices, and BTG has never, I mean, come on, people. Recovered. It's like a mummy, Right. Oh, it's still there. It's colorful. It looks nice, this and that and the other. Who reads it? Who subscribes to it? What influence does it have? I tell you, outside the Hindu community, nobody reads that magazine. I run into devotees all the time. Prabhupada disciples. They haven't seen it. Many of them haven't seen it Back to Godhead in years. You see. So that's what happened to Back to Godhead magazine, and it's just a shadow of its former self.
And it certainly isn't the backbone of the movement.
No, it's nowhere near the backbone of the movement. There were other things I asked you to look up. Srila Prabhupada had requested the devotees, all the devotees, to write. And there was some statements we couldn't really find them, and he had particularly requested sannyasis to write for Back to Godhead magazine, and so forth. So yeah, So here's that quote from Jayadvaita Swami. And my special thanks to Mr. Sri Kumar Podar, who has selflessly shared with us his vision, experience, and expertise in magazine publishing, and whose good advice we are only beginning to follow. I'm sorry, people. It's just like, can you turn back the clock? You can turn back the hands of a clock, but time remains as it is. Will the Back to Godhead magazine ever regain its former glory? Will it again be on the track to become what Srila Prabhupada envisioned it to be? Well, I don't think so. I'm a pessimist when it comes to this stuff. It's just like someone will go, "Oh, Prabhupada said." Yes, he said that when he expected that all the he saids would be followed. And now, how long is that? 90? 2010? That's almost 30 years of having pulled the BTG out. It's like, it should have been left alone. Those magazines were really good. The Origins and the, who are they? Maybe they should have incorporated those kind of articles in the BTG. Many things could have been done, but as is the history of the movement after the Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, there were many struggles. There were many moods of non-cooperation. Like once I was talking with Yadubar, and he explained to me that he could not even get money budgeted for a camera for his filming projects. And he related to me all the things that Srila Prabhupada had personally said to him or written to him and his wife was Vishaka Devi, the importance of film productions.
Mm-hmm.
Yet he explained he couldn't ever get what he got was just a pittance of what he really needed. And
same with Swarup Damodar Maharaj and the BI.
Yeah, that's right. I used to personally help Swarup Damodar financially, and it was a forever struggle for the BI to get the type of funding that they required, which Srila Prabhupada said they should have.
Mm.
So there were many problems, and BTG fell itself in the middle of one of these problems, and it has become what it is, just a shadow of its former self. And when I have looked at the BTG over the last decade or so, now and then I come across one. It's not a very substantial magazine. It's hard to figure out who is this for. Is this for the Hindus? Is this for the devotees? Is this for the public? Is this for all the above and some? Is this for the beginners? Is there anything in there of substance that a 30, 40, or 50-year practicing devotee might sink his teeth into, like something of grit? And the answer is, well, I haven't seen it. The BI also fell into that same thing, became a victim of the quarreling, of the disagreements, of not being willing to follow Srila Prabhupada's simple instructions of funding. I forget exactly what they were, but I remember Swarup Damodar, just before he passed away, unfortunately from a heart attack, just a month before, he had requested me to write an affidavit of what I knew and what research I had done supporting his plea for financial support from the BBT for the BI. And I had written up that affidavit and I had sent it to him, and there was some kind of internal court case going on or some kind of review going on. But before that developed, Swarup Damodar Maharaj passed away. That was very, very sad event, very unfortunate. All right, so Giri, is there anything else we wanted to add in here? This isn't a philosophical talk. This is kind of a review of history. And, most devotees in the world today have no idea how important the Back to Godhead magazine was in the Hare Krishna movement, how enthusiastic we all were for its distribution, what to speak of how many copies were distributed daily, monthly, and yearly, culminating in 1978 with 4.6 million. I mean, let me do a quick calculation here. I got my little smartphone, and let me see if I can. Where's a calculator? Calculator. Where's a calculator? Where's a calculator? Hang on, I got it. So I don't even know how to write 4.6 million. I think I got it. 4600000.
Yeah.
Divide that by 365 days in a year equals 12,600 Back to Godhead magazines being distributed every day. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I would wonder, are there even 12,600 Back to Godhead magazines printed bi-monthly? I don't know. But there sure isn't anything like that. Where is that at?
Yeah.
12,602 Back to God magazines being distributed every day in the heyday. Okay. And now, insignificant and ineffective. Nobody's even heard of that magazine. All right. Was there anything else we wanted to add?
No, we covered every point that we had. Yeah.
That's called a snippet of history, not to be forgotten. All right. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back with you in a day or so with a new topic. Hare Krishna.